Well, Milt's got the
These chairs are
stewardship
just here
one.
for look.
So, Milt, do you want to go first?
Oh, okay. In some ways, it would make more sense to go together first. That's okay. Just want to point out that thanks to some generous contributions in January, we got a good kickstart on our giving offerings this year, and are still well ahead, even though February wasn't quite as good, but we're still well ahead. You can see that as far as for the first 2 months, we expected weekly offerings totaling of 65,700. We actually had 68,800. And so not only are we ahead of budget for this year, but we're well ahead of where we were at this time last year, nearly $10,000, $9,000 ahead of where we were last year. And through March, our giving is still coming in pretty good. So I just want to thank everybody for their weekly offerings, whether they're or monthly or annual as well, whether they come through the envelopes or electronically, whatever. And we've been getting a lot electronically, and that seems to be a good way to go for a lot of people. So thanks.
That's good news.
If you've got your handout, it might be a little small to read. Maybe it's up here. If you'd like a larger copy, I can get you one. This one shows you both January and February. Of course, we don't have March's results just yet since we're in the middle of it. The good news is like Milt was saying, is because of the generosity in giving against the pledges, we are ahead of ourselves on the income line. And our expenses are a little bit lower because some of the things just don't come due yet. We expected to have a loss in January, much more significant than it was. If you take the year-to-date number, we expected to have a $17,000 loss at this point, and we only have a $1,700 loss at this point. So we're well ahead of where we need to be. Comparing it to where we are last year, because that's kind of our benchmark. Last year we were 23,000 below, and I would point out that last year we were also drawing from some dedicated accounts in the amount of $3,300. So that says we're kind of ahead of ourselves by about $25,000 here. So please, again, give yourself a hand. As we go forward, and everybody I know is always interested in the call process, one of the things we want to do is to be financially sound and have an uptick in our growth in our income so that our mission can expand here at LCC when we call that new leader. And while 2 months a trend does not make, it's certainly a blessing from God is that that's where we are. If you have any specific questions on any line item, I'm happy to talk to you about that, either in this forum or offline.
I guess I do. Financially speaking, does the bishop's office look at that to see whether does that make us look better in the eyes of?
So there's as we kind of reported in one of the things, we did what was called a sustainability study, and the sustainability study says where are we in terms of a lot of different things, in terms of our membership, in terms of our giving, in terms of our budget, and in terms of our facilities. So we take a look at all of these things, and the sustainability said to us at this moment in time that we could perhaps pay up to $105,000 total compensation package for a pastor. Perhaps that's a little on the low side. It sounds like a lot, but that includes insurance, which in and of itself can be $35,000+. So we'll take a look at that. We feel that's possibly a little low, so we want to see a little bit better number. Notice that we've actually put in a line item for $5,000 relative that says contingency/call process. We know the call process itself could be expensive, but we also want to start saving money up to have a little extra for whatever that salary and compensation package might look. But right now, we're looking pretty good. We're not maybe an A+ congregation, but we're not a D- one either. so we're in between.
I'm not sure if now's the time or you're going to be talking about it earlier, later. What about funds for the upcoming refurbishment of the youth center area?
Well, carried over from last year, we had approximately 4,300 and some smaller numbers after that already there. We've probably received a few little dedicated gifts to that this year, nothing of any great import. But then there is the whole refurbishment budget, and I understand they have a line item in that budget that the school is managing that talks about the refurbishment project. And I don't have that off the top of my head. But most of the fundraising that we may do here relative to the refurbishment are things that we would call incidental projects, but they could be big, like roof. Roof is a big one, and you'll be hearing from stewardship and operations as we go forward as to what a capital program for that might be. Dave, do you have anything to add to that you can think of that we're talking about at this time?
I think for the the bulk of the youth center funding is directly through the school. I mean, the heavy lifting for the church. I mean, as Cindy said, we've already gotten some pretty nice gifts for things like furniture and AV equipment, and just sort of like finishing it out. But I mean, the actual construction is not. That's not on our plate. But what Cindy did allude to is we are getting estimates to be done possibly in conjunction with the day school refurbishment, replace all the roofs on all of our buildings here, because every one of them is at the end of their useful life. They're the original equipment that came with the church. So that could be significant. Well, it will be significant to be sure, but as soon as we get some hard numbers and get some ideas how we want to proceed with the fundraiser, there will be a capital fundraiser for that, because that is an essential expense. We're going to, within a year or two, we could start seeing some significant leakage during heavy rainstorms, and then you've just multiplied your problem.
And thanks to Tim and Steve Cropper, they've been able to patch most of our leaks, and we haven't seen too many, knock on wood, but we haven't had a rain in a while either. So. There will also be things like parking lot that we'll be taking a look at. So there's many things that have been deferred maintenance, let's say, over time, that we may want to take a look at in conjunction with the refurbishment project and hopefully get some enthusiasm for. Mike?
Yeah, I would just emphasize that none of these are really directly relating to the refurbishment process. There really is no expense to us in that.
Thank you. Rudy?
One question. I'm assuming during the refurbishment, there will be some fences set up between us and the buildings that are going to be refurbished to take and limit access. Is that part of the project, their side of the school side of the project?
Absolutely.
We're not going to have to contribute any of that, are we?
Right.
No, they've got all that handled.
Do they have it funded?
They're working on it.
Holly's nodding yes, so we'll go for yes. So some more good news. Thank you.
Go to the next slide or something.
Well, I think we're going to go to Kristen. And
Pastor, did you want to speak first?
Which-
That slide, okay.
Yes.
There you go.
Just recently, we had a council leadership retreat, and was an evening. It wasn't nearly as long or as involved as we might have liked it to have been. But we had as guest leader one of the assistants to the bishop. Rob Carlson was here with us, and one of the things he shared I thought was particularly helpful to us, maybe as we are thinking about the listening posts in just a few moments. And that was this graph that he drew for us, and I'm going to just review it quite quickly. What it is it sort of relates to the cycles of a congregation. You might say the cycles of life or the cycles of the whole church as well, but it can also be viewed as the cycle of a congregation like our own congregation. And like a mission congregation just getting started, we are always trying to ask the question, what is God's dream for us here? In other words, when you're meeting even in the living room of somebody's home and you're thinking about doing a ministry and starting a whole new ministry and maybe a new community, one of the questions you begin by asking, I wonder what it is that God is seeing for us here. Well, it's something that we all need to do over and over again, and that is going back to visit the question, what is God's dream? I always call those the big God questions, you know. What does God want us to be doing? That's where we should start before we move to other areas. Then as you begin to understand or you feel God is revealing to you God's vision or God's plan for us, we begin then to shape it into vision. A congregational vision. And this congregation has done that from time to time, and we need to always keep doing it. And then after you have some sense of what your vision is, you move up towards a mission. And we usually develop a mission statement. And by the way, they often say that mission statements need to be reviewed and even changed, but that's kind of hard to do when you get one going really well. You sort of hang on to it for a long period of time. But you do at least need to revisit what it means, so that it's not just something you say over and over and over again, but that you see it as the guiding post or the guide for you in our ministry and our ministry and mission here. Well, then from the mission statement, indeed, we go to our ministry and we start putting ministry teams together and we start organizing ourselves and thinking about all the various pieces and who's going to do them and the volunteers, the committees, everything that would help us or facilitate us, you see, in being the people we want to be in this place. And when all this is working really well, we're at the vitality. We're at a good point. We're healthy. We feel well. We feel energized. We are God's people, doing living out God's dream, doing our mission and vision, and having our ministry teams all functioning. But as cycle goes, it also comes back on the other side, coming down. And this is a normal thing, not something, oh my gosh, what's happening to us? This is a very normal cycle. And that is, all of a sudden we find ourselves maybe saying, you remember when? Now, you probably have never heard that said in this congregation, but from time to time we do that, you know. You remember when we used to have, 30 people in the pastor's Bible class, you know, questions like that. I remember a time, well, we start thinking backwards instead of forward, thinking back to our older history as a congregation. And then we begin to wonder, well, why is that so? You know, why isn't it like it used to be? You know, I'm kind of wondering, we got the wrong people in the wrong place, you know, what's going on here? We start wondering if maybe we're not on the right pathway or road. And then we might question, maybe it's so and so. She or he maybe been doing this too long, or maybe we question somebody else over here saying, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. And sometimes it can get kind of personal when you get down in that kind of, we're questioning each other sometimes and whatever. Well, if you let this continue to flow, you see, and just go, you begin to go into what might be considered a significant decline. And actually, there are congregations that will lead to death if nothing is done about it. But the point is, this can be a very constructive time. This is like what you've been doing in your listening post. You're starting to ask, okay, what are the things? And then you try to channel that energy back right over here to the beginning, like a cycle. Okay, given all of this, how is that going to help us discover what God's dream is for us in this place? What is going to be our new vision as we move forward? And even if we grab a hold of what we're already doing, you got a new pastor coming in sometime here in the near future, so there's going to be some new vision. and some new things to discover. Your mission may shift or change. We need to be looking at how that's going to happen and who our partners are, what will our ministry be. So what you see here, it is a cycle. And it's important that we take this time, which can be very creative, and we place that energy over here back to asking the right questions instead of continuing on the line of questioning each other or questioning why we aren't like we used to be or things like that. So I thought I'd share that with you because I think it relates a lot to what we're doing here, going over the listening post, because a lot of listening post input, was kind of in here, the wondering and the questioning. And so at that time, Kristen will give us a little summary of that. I might have not led exactly into what you want to say, but it might give us a little background, Kristen. Thank you.
I'm back. The first meeting without me, they decided I should help with this process, and I'm happy to do it. So, I've made some slides here, and we can put them up. But first, I just wanted to say on that curve, just to point out, it takes no small amount of courage and vulnerability to go from the one side to the other side. Yep. And so, if we acknowledge that, and we just start out by saying, it's going to take some courage to get to know what our vision is, to go through this process again. So to get to the listening team, just to review, that was done and distributed back in the end of January. Anyone who was a part of the interview process got a copy of that, the face-to-face interview. Those who wanted a copy of it could, and you can still email the Marcia at office@mylcc to get a copy. But I'm not going to go through the whole 4 pages of it, so we're just going to hit the highlights here. They identified some strengths. You'll see them here, the school and its outreach and admission to the community. Our mission outreach, our elected leadership, office, operations staff, our location, our building, and then the passion of our volunteers. I can do that. Okay. Their observations. This is what they observed of us. Could be well served by improving communications. Now, to this seemed a little vanilla to me. Let's improve communication. Okay, we're doing things like this. We're holding quarterly meetings. We are emailing people twice a week. We are communicative with our congregation. What I think maybe some of this could be leaned into a little more is around how do we trust each other in our communication? Are our teams working together or at cross purposes? And so I think maybe that's something that we could look at. Various points of view among variety of groups at LCC. Yes. Yes. Gold star on that observation. And I think we can highlight that as a strength, right? We have a variety of people from different walks of life and different perspectives. And yes, it's an observation, and I think it's something as we're visioning we need to be very aware of and have some real humility around. Role of the pastor. There were questions around, they observed questions around what is the role of the pastor. Now I put in here staff and lay leaders, also because during my time on council I heard, people wondering what, and this is maybe some of the stuff on the other side of the curve, but who's in charge here? What are we really doing? These kinds of things. So the role of everyone, not just the pastor, but really the staff, the lay leaders, the ministry teams, what are we all doing here? And I think, again, that takes some courage to really look at and some vulnerability around. Attendance, participation at LCC reflect a larger societal trend. Yes, another one that's fairly obvious. The trend for our society today is not that churches are growing, although they are. There are churches that are growing, and there are things we can look at around the vitality of those pieces and those churches that we can try and mimic and look at. So those were their observations. Party questions. They left us with a lot of questions under each observation, but these were the questions at the end of the report. So how is the value of the day school measured? Could it be measured in other ways besides membership? We're looking at why aren't there more day school families attending? Is that the only measure of how we value the school and our relationship between that? What does the greater involvement at the day school look like? And I think Pastor and Holly are exploring that right now. What does the greater involvement look like? What are those pieces that we want to see grow? And you guys are doing a great job on that. are all the questions around the role of the pastor answered? And I put in there again, I put the staff lay leaders. Do we want to continue asking questions around the role, or do we have those questions answered, or do we want to move that questioning, pivot it towards more of a visioning kind of thing? Those are questions we need to ask ourselves, right? And then the last one here, is it possible to acknowledge the grief of a smaller membership and lean into change for the future? So that one I think is, in my mind, the most important, takes the most courage. Can we look at things and say, yeah, this is not how we remember it, and can we have the courage to change and to lean into that change, to really embrace what that change looks like? So that's kind of the summary of the report, and then I added some things here around other things, other listening stuff we've done in the last 2 years. It's almost time's up, so we're gonna go through this, but I think these are things just to start the council questioning. We don't, when we're looking at that graph that Pastor showed us, if we're getting closer to a point where we're calling a committee for a call, we want to have them be able to summarize what they're feeling here easily, not invent our wheel, not vision for us, but to take what they know and what they feel and what they see and present it to a larger group. We have a lot of data points on that. So we've done some intentional deep listening over the last 2 years, and how do we want to use that data to pivot towards this visioning, right? So this piece, the listening team report, certainly one of them. Other things that we did were developing strategic goals. So that was back in 2017. Future Directions had a large hand in that, as did the council, and we developed 4 of them. And those were based on data that was around Equifax and Experian, statistical demographic data, and how our reach, who do we want to reach, what are our strengths, that whole pond process. Those are still valid. I think those are still worth looking at. We had a meeting a year ago-ish in this room. It was all of the staff, council members, any sort of lay leader in a ministry team organization, and we had a big old report that came out of that. There's some good nuggets of information in there that I think we could look at. One of them was around our structure and how maybe it doesn't mirror our vision. We have a very robust mission. I think that came out in the listening team report, Worship, Grow, Share. But our ministry teams don't reflect that overarching, we aren't organized by Worship, Grow, Share, right? So maybe we look at that. Maybe we reshuffle the cards and we look at Worship, Grow, Share in terms of how we organize ourselves. And then the listening team report. So lots of questions in here. We highlighted a few of them, but we could definitely deep dive as deep as we want to in that. Also, not on here, but I've mentioned to the council, the Senate has some information around looking at the vitality of congregations. It's called Congregational Vitality. It's a survey. We take it, it's scored 4 to 6 weeks later, someone comes in and kind of debriefs. That's a 90-minute debrief. And that really looks at what they know of congregations around the country that are growing, that are vital, that have an element to them, or elements that are helping them grow. And then they ask us questions, and they sort of put the two over, and we see, okay, maybe we could do some things here or there. So that's something we could certainly take in combination with all this other data. And then the last one is just behaviors, right? So if we want to stay on one end of that curve, we don't want to keep dwelling on the other side. What are the things? What are the things that are really going to say to us, we want to stop doing that. I want to stop doing that. And I want to, and have consensus around that, so that when we do encounter those behaviors, or we feel ourselves slipping into that kind of thing, we immediately know, like Worship, Grow, Share. These are the things we're not going to do, whatever they are. So those are kind of my thoughts on that. Pastor and I have not had a whole lot of time to talk about this, but we can. We can certainly. We can certainly dive deeply into this, but really wanted to get your group here, as people who have taken time after church, to answer some of these. Where do we want to go with all of this? Where do we want to take all this data, and what do we want to do with it? Do we have consensus around what types of points we want to look deeper into? And I welcome anybody's input on this right now.
And maybe Pastor would know the answer to the vitality survey, or and the churches that they looked at across the country that the Synod looked at, were they all Lutheran churches or were they churches in general?
For the most part, this is a Lutheran program that's based on other programs.
Okay.
It's actually in the ELCA. We're talking Synod a good bit, Florida Bahamas Synod, but it actually is a program of the whole Evangelical Lutheran Church in America to try to help revitalize congregations. I know that Paul was just recently in touch with Connie Schmucker. Connie is an assistant to the bishop who kind of helps with congregations in transition, and especially as we're moving in the direction of call committees. That's kind of her assistant to the bishop role. The other assistant is one who does other kinds of roles. So part of our goal here is to get Connie in here to both talk with the Futures Directions Committee, so they're on board, and then the whole council, probably in the form of a retreat with her to try to take some of this information and say, how does that fit into a vitality, and how might we want to set such a program up? Because we're all kind of anxious, we want to get moving, but we want to make sure we're at the right place before we move to the call committee. And that's not necessarily that far out for this congregation. It's a fairly healthy one, but there's things to do yet, so we need to continue. Thank you. Yes, Joel?
Has anybody thought about the timing of making these changes? I would be concerned about the idea of making an enormous amount of changes at the same time, without a timeline or a plan of saying, let's make this change now, because otherwise we're going to get chaos versus an organized movement to a new organization or a new leadership.
Mm-hmm. And that's why you see the word consensus up here a lot. We'd really have to lean into that, consensus piece. So what is it that we want to change? First of all, prioritization of what that is. Maybe it's not everything. Maybe it's two things. Maybe it's one thing. But we need consensus on that because we do have that variety of viewpoints, right? We do come from a space here where we have different points of view. So we need consensus on what it is that we want to change, if anything. Yes?
One of the things I've learned from some of my other board work is that when you're faced in a challenging environment of, which we are in demand, basically, one of the things you want to do is have a splash, they call it. And I see the upcoming refurbishment, especially as it becomes a reality, as a big splash.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's going to be a very visible thing in the local community and certainly amongst both our congregation and our school families. So getting back to a timeline type of idea, I would suggest that for a near-term strategy is that we put something together that coincides with what we know is going to be a splash, and we kind of know when it's going to happen, and be ready to develop, have something ready to roll out that takes advantage of that in a synergistic way. So if there could be just, if you want to focus on one thing,
right.
I think it's staring us in the face because we're going to get that attention. It's going to be seen as a very positive, hey, they're growing, they're going places type of thing. We need to take advantage of that moment.
Absolutely. And so that would be an August time frame. If we're going to put a date on it, we're looking at that fall date for
and those
completion.
things don't, the attention span of people, they don't last very long.
Yeah. Yeah, Sylvia.
Okay, I got two reactions, both to the meeting and your list there. Anybody who's read the listening report knows that there's a very homogenized abstraction, very theoretical points.
Right.
Okay, I have two issues that come to mind immediately when I talk to people. That's what they want to know about. What are we going to do about music? What's traditional? What's contemporary? Where are the issues regarding music? And why don't we have an organ being played at least for a hymn on every single service? And then on the other side, you have this issue of the second service that gets bandied about and it's mentioned in your reports. These are things people want to know about. Okay, the other thing is with the school, just to report, let's see, 2 instances in which I became aware of what the school was doing. We don't know what they're doing. If you don't have kids there, you have no idea. They had a fair. When was that? We went there. We won something in the raffle. It was very exciting. Other people in the church weren't there. I don't know who else was there. We didn't see anybody we knew. It was a great event. We had a lot of fun. Not just because we won something. It was lively. It was nice. The other thing, I was in the church on a weekday doing something. I can't remember what it was. And here was this whole activity going on. It was a musical recital. Rebecca was in charge of it, I guess. They had all these little kids performing. There was a huge mass of parents in the audience. I wish I'd known about it. I would have wanted to hear that. How delightful to get to see some of the kids doing things. They're using the building. Why don't we know about these events? That's a very small step that it would take to publicize better what the school is doing. Maybe they have basketball games we'd like to attend. It isn't just the parents of kids. Some of us are retired and desperate for entertainment. It's better than reality TV, you know what I'm saying? So those are 2 areas that very specific things that we could do. The abstract, the theoretical, all very fine. I know you need an overarching thing, but I don't get much out of this because there isn't any real data in there. There's just categories of data. So what about these specific issues? When are those going to get discussed?
Can I
Well,
say something really quick?
Wow, okay.
I think what you're bringing up, I deal with in my job all the time, and it's tying together the mission and vision to an individual level. So share. You're talking about sharing, and Kristen brought up communication. That information is not being communicated to an individual, but it is part of our vision, is to share. So if we can start making and having these kinds of conversations and finding things like, that's a great idea. I'd love to know what the basketball teams, where they are in the rankings. How many wins and losses do they have? Those kinds of things. To share what's going on across the street with us is just, I think, one point of how, as individuals, do we think about worship, grow, and share. How do, when we walk in the room, yeah, you gotta, it's on the front board, I don't read it. How do we as an organization deal with that is completely a different question, and then how do you as an individual want to worship, grow, and share? So I think we should think about it that way too.
Yep.
And you're right.
Mike?
Yeah, listening to both comments, sorry if I have voice problems. I would echo Rudy's perspective about this. We have 2 things going on. The comment about music and activities, those are here and now questions. We have ministry teams to deal with those, and those are easily addressed. The other is pastor's curve here, which is part of the call process. Some in the room have been involved and served on call process, as I have. As a friend of mine would say, this is an excellent opportunity to practice patience, because without doing it step by step and getting anxious and getting the horse before the cart, or whatever, we can have chaos, and that's what we don't want. We want to do it orderly, so the process is successful. It's beginning. The council has charged future directions with the visioning process, and on the curve, we're at the beginning. So people in this room need to keep in mind and share with others, this is potentially a multi-year process.
Absolutely.
And
Don't tell my
patience.
wife that, but I appreciate it. But I do want to say something real quickly about the worshiping part. Of course, we came on board in January, and we ended up with a lot of change in leadership. Our music director was different. Maddie's just getting his feet on the ground. So It's going to take a little while for that to be a reality for him to feel strong. But we are working with him. We have a worship team. And first questions were, what can Matty do? What will be the embrace of his ability? By the way, he is working just to learn how to play the organ itself. The other thing is, how much budgeting can we use to bring in additional musicians? So again, the question is being raised. We're trying to, is a new umbrella, is asking new questions. It's a revisioning of the music program, not going back to how things used to be, because we're basically in one service right now, and whether we go to two, the worship team certainly feels that has to wait at least to be on August, as a matter of fact, because we feel like we have to get stronger with our present music program and those who are involved. We want to grow the choir. I mean, you've seen Maddie trying to say, where are the voices? We need more voices up front. So, you know, there are a lot of things that people could do to help strengthen the programming so that it could move faster. But in the meantime, we're trying to take the steps that bring Maddie on board fully as our music director, myself on as an interim pastor trying to learn. I mean, you know, if we make a lot of missteps because we don't know all the steps as they've been done in the past. And so we do try to say, is this something we want to keep on doing? And usually somebody always reminds me, by the way. Usually after services. You know, right. So the important thing is that there was some significant change right coming into this year after all of that. And that was a lot of the leadership. So we're trying to get on board. And I think we got a good team working, and Marcia's good and solid in the office helping all of us. As you heard, you know, we're trying to work with that school. And your idea about the school is a wonderful thing. Right now, it went the other way a little bit. I have been invited to include a devotional every week in their newsletter. Well, maybe that newsletter needs to be, the fall needs to be more public over here. You know, I read the fall, which is their Path of Paul, which is their weekly newsletter, but maybe that needs to be shared more broadly over here, you know, as a tool, just to, hey, what's going on? So that input, we just need to keep receiving it.
Yes.
And then we try to filter it into the proper ministry teams, and we have some very good, and by the way, even council member, you turn the council up almost, well, about 4 new members on council, and Kristen deserted us.
I am here.
She's here. But so we have some change over there as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's not excuse making, it's just that we all are trying to get on board as quick as we can.
And I think in all of this, we just have to keep the patience and the respect level very high, because otherwise we are going to make missteps. Ray? And then David. Ray first, and then David.
Ray first. You want to go first?
You go first.
Go ahead and go
Oh,
first.
the beauty before age.
Oh, thank you. I would like to comment on a share business a little bit, and I'm impressed with all the comments that you folks are making. It sounds like we're on the same level, and maybe we can do more of this. The one thing about the sharing and what has influenced most, influences the organization, is certainly the pastor. And one of the criticisms I have of the last call committee, that their discussions are private and confidential, but they were too private and too confidential, because we as a congregation did not get a flavor of what they were talking about, or what were some of the issues with the pastor that they were calling. And I think the next call committee would really do well, and they do not have to use names, but if somebody stands out with them as a possible pastor, they could share some things about him or her. And there could be some discussion, open discussion in the congregation about what, is that good or bad or indifferent, or do we want that, do we need that? And so I would encourage that kind of conversation. And many people, I worked with Bishop Benaway, and being the first reader of the clergy that want to come in here and to come to Florida Bahama Synod, and they have to send in all kinds of paperwork. And I was fortunately the first reader of that paperwork. Now, there's no perfect pastor except maybe me.
That's him, Pastor Benaway.
Two in the room. Wow. We got some
Pastor Jerry, come on.
How soon? But I'll tell you that among all that paperwork that comes in, you can identify some things that are not necessarily positive. And so I hope our call committee does a real deep search, let's say, and takes their time and communicates with the congregation regularly at where they're at.
Well, we've set that up, right? I mean, now we have these quarterly meetings, and we have a little more in terms of communication than we had in 2013. For 2 emails a week, you know, but we can get the word out about some things. But I think your idea is good, Dave.
I wanted to make an observation. I too have had the opportunity to be leading several different kinds of change management, reorganization, restructuring, organizational restructuring over the past. And the amount of communication that comes through on that is very small here compared to what the standard is for good communication and managing change. And the second observation I'd make is that it's extremely important in that communication to go after the elephants in the room, the rumors, the concerns that people have head on. And even if it's to say, we know there's this, we're talking about it, we're trying to figure it out, we'll have an answer for you when. But without that kind of communication, it really creates anxiety and all kinds of problems. So in the communication, I would recommend that gets considered.
That's a good point. You trigger something that I remember during one of the sessions we did with Pastor Armstrong. Was Healthy Congregations. He had an idea of a pinch praise box. And as we're going through this, combing through all the data, figuring out what the change is going to be, putting timelines to this stuff, the anxiety is going to come up naturally. It just will. And having opportunities for our council or call committee or whomever to hear those concerns in a way that's fairly immediate, right? So maybe we think about that as a council, a pinch praise box someplace where you could just write out some things. Margie.
At one time during the initial conversation with Pastor Rob Carlson, he talked about, and he mentioned about this walk around the church that he did. And I had thought about maybe that would be a good idea. Unfortunately, didn't get a chance to go forward with that, but it is Lent. We are in the middle of, trying to figure things out here, and what better way to do it than to have prayer.
Absolutely.
And as he spoke about, we could just do it after church service, just do a walk around the perimeter and do that prayer cycle. Mm-hmm. And so I would like to throw that out there if there's anybody that would like to lead that or do that, maybe just something to think about.
I'll share something I've done virtually like that, and if anybody wants to be a part of it, I will
Tuesday
certainly.
nights.
Tuesday nights from 8 to 8:20, a group of us, wherever we are, sat in our homes, whatever, in a different state, in a different time zone. We sometimes get the time mixed up. I send out a text, hey, it's 8 o'clock, and 12 of us just pray for LCC. That's the focus for 20 minutes. And if that's something we want to send out more, I don't know that we need to all be on a group text, but you know, wherever you're sat at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday for 20 minutes, pray for this church.
Yeah. You know, we're talking about making changes and things like that, and I'm a firm believer in that we don't show as much appreciation for what we have. And, you know, compared to some other churches, I feel like my church is doing well. And, but I find with some people, they're so busy wanting to do something else, they don't even stop and think what we already have here. And I think we have a lot.
Yeah.
And people just don't think about that. They're too busy trying to criticize and too busy to wanting to do other things. And I think we should all try to say, well, you're coming here, don't you appreciate that we have a church here and we have a roof over, whether the roof needs to be replaced or not, a roof over our head, that they kind of lose sight of how much we do have here.
That was part of the point of this thing too, because one of the questions was, what are we doing well, right? And they try to highlight the strengths, because a lot of, it's easier, right, to go to the negative, just human nature.
Right.
It's like, it's easier to criticize than to appreciate.
So when somebody criticizes, and I'll try to remember and say, well, you're coming here, don't you appreciate that you have this church to come here? Maybe they'll think a little
Holly.
bit more.
Go ahead, Holly.
As I was reading through the listening post, I did notice one of the questions on the listening post itself. Now, I wasn't a part of it, but it was, what do you see 5 to 10 years down the road? And then I didn't see any answers to that question. Now, maybe I missed that page, but it seemed like we all were so focused right here that we didn't seem to have any answers. Almost following up what you're saying here, we didn't seem to have the answers for a vision that was further out there. And some of that is what, you know, we need to be looking at. You know, what is our future direction? So it's sometimes uncomfortable. Some people don't necessarily like to dwell in the larger picture view, prefer, you know, the nuts and bolts, and that's very important. And we have ministry teams, and ministry teams need to be focused on the nuts and bolts, and we need to be continuing to do that and communicate it. But also there needs to be that team, you know, and the council has shares in that, but future direction probably carries it as their name, and that is, you know, looking out there further out. And we may need to revisit that question, because I don't think we put any answers
No,
to it.
there's not I didn't see a page on that in here.
You do have a page?
I did not see a page.
Oh, no, I don't think there is.
Holly, you had a comment?
I just wanted to say that in response somewhat to what Sylvia said, is that having Pastor Benaway here is for the school such a positive, because there's a partnership that was maybe missing a bit before, but had been there prior. So I just think that we've always worked well together as a school and a church, and I feel the minute Pastor Benaway walked in the door, I felt it again, and I want to thank Pastor Benaway publicly for that. I know the school is embracing his presence and his subtle ways of just permeating the school and the church. So I think it will be, you'll see a lot more partnership happening because it has been well received when offered lately, and it's also gone the other way, as Pastor Benaway has said. He makes offerings and the school's like, yes, we want that, of course. So you'll see more of that. Part of the publication piece, though, is that people are so busy to read things. I mean, honestly, if you don't have 4 bullet points and no more, folks don't have time or can't take all of that in. So it's finding a way to communicate not only what the church is doing, because I think the Wednesday and Friday is great, but it's a lot. And some of the prints is very tiny and fancy script, and it's beautiful, but so it's finding a way for both entities to communicate to each other in a way that folks will read it, hear it, remember it, understand it. So we just need, I mean, that's something the school has to work on too. Believe me, our parents, are there any in the room? Don't read it. Yes, there's one. Okay. Close your
He
ears.
reads,
They
yeah, he
don't
reads it all.
always remember what they read.
Yeah, but that's not an excuse that I accept. Point is, a lot of us are retired. As I said, we're starved for entertainment. I said to even have access to the school's calendar of events would be helpful. Can we add that to our own website somehow, or make it clear where to get that information? That should be easy.
Sure, we'll do a better job.
And is
Yeah,
that,
we
does
can
that
stick
include
links,
calendar
I mean,
events?
Sylvia, we can talk about maybe going through the school thing and say what would be interesting, and then we can put dynamic links there, so maybe you and I can get together and do something like that.
The church calendar and the day school calendar both use Google, and they look almost exactly the same. So sometimes if you're not sure which one you're on, but there's something almost every day on the day school calendar.
Do we have to have a Google account for that?
No. It's on the day school website.
Yeah, it's on their website too. I mean, not that you need to go to another website, but over communication.
Well, we have the week and the insert.
Yeah,
And
we
we
have
need-
the vehicles, right? We just need to
maybe
tweak
one or
them.
two of the highlight events,
Yeah.
you know.
And I think that's way easier than getting to the question around vision and what are we going to roll out in August, people?
Right, what are we gonna roll out in August,
And
right?
there's a link on our website also to the day school. Just click
Yes.
on it and they'll take you right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. Marvin, come on up here.
I just let her keep on going, you know. I'm one of the rookies, true rookies on the council. We've got several. So we're learning as we go along. We're relying on a lot of the, just like Pastor is, we're relying on a lot of the people who've been with it a long time. I just like to think of that curve. If you've been on a roller coaster, you're really building momentum as you're going down. And what we want to do is take that and take it up to the next step. So just keep that in mind. So thank you very much for coming. We appreciate
Close
it.
us in prayer.
Why don't we all close with the Lord's Prayer and
Oh,
stand up?
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's another
Rich.
question. Oh, Rich wanted to make an announcement. Come on up here, Rich.
I saw something on the schedule that said something about, save the date.
Oh, certainly May 5th for the fish fry.
In the interest of communications and sharing,
Yes.
I wanted to remind everybody of the community forum on climate change is coming up the 23rd of April, 7 o'clock. We are doing extensive publicity. We have a panel of experts. We think when the names are out, you'll recognize that are really going to contribute to the evening. We're hoping we're going to fill the sanctuary, and we're going to have overflow in this area, we hope. And my appeal is, that evening, there's probably a need for 35 to 40 people doing a lot of different things, from greeters, ushers, parking lot attendants, kids involved, etc. So if somebody asks you to help out, please volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe we can give you a little practice. If you come the day before, that's Easter. And you can help with the parking lot situation as well. Let us pray together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Go in peace and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.